Okay, so today is one of the days I've really looked forward to, but I need to give a grown-up adult warning. There may be words in this conversation that shock even me. Okay, that's the warning over. And nice to see an old mate of mine, Rich Mulholland. Welcome.
Hey, Stuart, it's wonderful to be here. I promise not to be so scary. I've become tame in my old age. Yeah, and in fact, maybe we can talk about why I actually swear less the older I get and what I realized about it and how it was an important rule when I started, but I've tried to get rid of it now. But that's something we could save for later.
But that's an interesting point. The first time I think we worked together, I said it was in the big theater, I think somewhere in I can see the room, but it was a great big theater. And there were two things that truly amazed me about you. And having been in this game a long time, not a lot amazes, but this did. The thing that amazed me most was that the sound packed in. And it was something like a 2,000 seater. It was one of those big cinemas at Monte Cassino in Joburg. The sound packed in, and I know many speakers who would just collapse under the weight of that going wrong. You didn't. Why?
Well, when I work with speakers, I always talk about the importance of content confidence. So I'm confident about my content before I start. That's the first thing, right? So I think that too many speakers, everything has to go right for it to be perfect. But for me, what I need is I need to do pre-work. I need to know what I want to talk about, what I want to achieve. And then I need to not over rehearse my presentation. So I always talk about lines and links. I want to know what's going to link one bit of content to the next bit of content so I can get there smoothly. And then I want to know inside those two links, I want to know, are there any lines that I absolutely want to get across, like microscripts? So when the audience hears it, they'll be like, oh, remember that. Beyond that, I can expand and I can expand and contract that to whatever I need to do. The second thing is the understanding that I can't take myself too seriously. As a professional speaker, no matter who you are, we all want to think, oh, we're hired just because of our brains. We're there as entertainment, and we're there to entertain an audience. And if something goes wrong in the middle of a presentation, who am I as the speaker supposed to turn to? I am the entertainer. So it's my job to step up and to hold the audience and to have some fun with them. And you know what? It's actually the best time. And I'll tell you why. First of all, let's look at it. This is the story you opened with and the story you remembered. Okay. We have to break people's expectation engines in order to be remembered. I realized as a waiter when I started, when I was in my, when I was 18, basically the day after I finished school, the tables where something went wrong, those were always the tables that gave me the biggest tip, because those were the opportunity for me to surprise and delight. The expectation engine had been hacked, and I had a chance to say, okay, now I can show up. Whereas the tables where everything just ran perfectly, I could show that I was doing well, but that spoke to the restaurant and their efficiency, not to me as a standout waiter. I think it's the same as speaking.
Where did it come from? Where did you get your ability to communicate so comfortably? I know you were a roadie for heavy metal bands, also as a youngster. But what was it? Your parents, were they influences that shaped you towards what we see today?
So genetically, apparently, everybody always says to me the same thing, like especially from my mom's side. So, oh, you got this from your grandfather. So I look a lot like my grandfather. My grandfather was a Polish leather salesman. He built up shops. He was told he was going to die. He wanted to start a business. Before he died, he got quite sick. He wanted to start a business before he died so that my grand would have some degree of financial stability. And he just kept on fighting it and growing. And in the end, I think he had 6 leather shops around Glasgow, and he was doing really, really well. And he apparently had the gift of the gab, and he was able to speak and bring people together. And if you look at a picture of him, obviously I'm like the older version of my grandfather because he died when my mom was 7. So, yeah.
And there's also the paths that you followed. Before I talk about that, what is it that you and I like about the TV series Shameless? I don't know a lot of people who would admit to it, but for me, my wife and I would sit down and we would just be more and more shocked and couldn't wait for the next episode. It's so radically screwed up family, but that was pure delight for us.
Yeah, so we just finished it recently, maybe 3 weeks ago for the second time, or second time for me, first time for my wife, and that's exactly what it is, right? It's people want novelty, they want, and there are four novelties: counterintuitive, counter narrative, elegant articulation, and shock and awe. You want to be counterintuitive. So as a speaker, I want to say something that makes you go. My favorite reaction from an audience, the first thing anybody presenting wants to get from an audience is where they go, "Huh, that sound means." I never thought about it that way before. That's the start of something, because when you do a talk, you want to open with clarity and curiosity, right? That's the opening of everything. The audience needs to be clear about why they should listen, but they need to be curious. So if I turn around and said, guys, today I want to talk to you about purpose and how we should all find our why. Well, everyone can turn around and say, well, I understand we're talking about purpose, but here we go again, talking about finding our why. There's no curiosity because everyone has seen that movie. They're on the 5th rerun. But if I turn around and say to you, hey, so today I want to chat to you quite seriously about personal purpose. And more importantly, I want to talk to you about why we have been totally, utterly lied to about personal purpose, and why I think we've misconstrued the idea that, say, somebody like Simon Sinek set up in the first place. And that's what we're going to explain. Now there's clarity and there's curiosity. So that's number one. Number two is counter narrative. I have in my talk on leadership, I do explain, or in fact, in some of the talks, just even on personal development, I do explain why I think empathy is a really bad idea. And for the most part, there should be small moments of empathy, but there should be, for the most part, we should be compassionate and sympathetic, and we should absolutely not be empathetic, especially in positions of leadership. And a lot of people, like, they sit up in their chair and they're like, oh, and they almost get angry because this attacks their worldview. By the end of the talk, I make them understand that one thing is that maybe we have a definition problem, and the other thing is like, oh, that actually does make a lot of sense. So that's going counter narrative. The third one is elegant articulation. First example, let's go to, say, somebody like Simon Sinek. His talk, I can't remember what it was called, but the start with why. That why was amazing because that was a book on purpose, but we'd all heard about purpose forever, but his elegant articulation was linking it to, instead of saying, what is my purpose, what is my why? Another example would be the book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, came out in the late 90s, right? And I can just say the book title to you, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and you know what it means. Years later, a guy called Mark Manson came out with basically the same book, and the book was called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And the premise is identical, but he just came up with an articulation that felt more right for the mid to 2020s,
more relevant
teens, more relevant exactly to the world where we're in today. And then the fourth one is shock and awe. So it's something that's like shocking, and you have your audience awestruck. Now I like to flirt between these areas. I do like to. The swearing came from maybe a little bit of shock and awe. Wasn't shocking. It was just shocking in the context of it, or in the moment I brought something up. If anything I said at a comedy set would be deemed tame, but in the context of a presentation, for some reason, the same audience who watched John Flismus in the evening watched me during the day, and they might think that I'm more shocking because his context is comedy, my context is speaking. Although he's a wonderful speaker as well. I mean, don't get me wrong. So those novelties, I call them the Shapiro Matrix. There's a guy called Julian Shapiro. He's a writer. He came up with them for writing articles. We talked to them to presenting. I think Shameless offers a lot of that. I think this show is an exercise in amazing novelty creation. It does. They rethink things. They say things that, like, you react different ways. On one side, you see people who you should dislike. They're stealing, they're doing things, but then their values seem to be completely tied into your value. It's a real anomaly, and it's really funny. And if you've not watched it, I think you should.
Love it. I think I'm going to have to watch it again. Talking of shock and awe and surprise, you do not look like your typical besuited, smart business coach. And yet what you teach leaders, they love, they grab onto you, and what's different about what drives your thinking and thought processes?
So little known fact, when I started Missing Link, I wore a suit every day. I went to, there was in Four Ways Mall, there used to be a tailor, and I went to him. What was it called? It was like, it was below the Caldi's Cafe. And it was this shop where you could buy suits and things like this. And I went in and I bought these pure wool suits, waistcoat, jacket, tie, everything. I spent a fortune on them. And every single day I went to work in a suit. And so I started Missing Link when I was 22, and I was going to try and sell people why they needed better presentations. But an interesting thing happened is people, when I walked into, I knew straight away that I wanted to deal with corporates, not entrepreneurs. When I walked into a meeting with a suit and tie, people looked at me like I was an intern or a graduate, because that's in their algorithm. When they see a 22-year-old walking around in a suit, those are the only two categories they exist in. And so they look at me as like them, a suit, but less. Okay? So I'm in the same category of them, but I obviously lack their experience. Now, at this time, I got quite involved in the punk rock community, and a big part of it is, be yourself and things like this. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to be myself. And I decided that's it. And again, maybe another little known fact, up until my 30s, I didn't wear long pants until the day I turned 30. So I had long pants for weddings, but they had detachable legs so that once the ceremony was finished, I could take them off and be in shorts. And that was it. That's what you got. Or a kilt. Kilt was my formal get out of jail card. And so I would go to meetings, maybe 23, 24 years old, meeting with the CEO of all the banks in South Africa, but we worked with most of them. We didn't work with Mike Brown early on. And they would all take me seriously. And the thing is now they had a place to put me, creative, different human being who's on a completely different path than we are. Therefore, he's not like us, and that then helps us fill a gap. And then when we started 21 Tanks, the whole idea was a counter consultancy. Why do you keep on spending all this money with people who think just like you? What you need, you don't have a knowledge problem. It's not like any group of smart people. It's not when you're struggling with a problem, it's not because you're too smart or because you're not smart enough, it's because you're too smart. What you need is somebody else to offer you perspective. And everything about who we were as a company and how we presented ourselves. And incidentally, it wasn't enough for us to show up in wacky clothing. We had to show up as we were and be smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's very interesting, because when a company comes to us looking for a speaker, and then for whatever reason, maybe the budget's too high or whatever, and I just say to them, they say, we're going to go back, we're going to use our sales manager. I say, well, the trouble is with that, you're getting the same thinking regurgitated. By bringing in someone from the outside, you're bringing in someone from the outside, somebody who doesn't attend your board meetings or sit in your exec meetings, and they are just fresh thinking with the objective in mind. And that's the big plus, isn't it, about bringing in an outsider?
Sure. I think the biggest problem is that they think they're looking for a speaker. And I understand it, right? If I go back to the idea of, okay, we're entertainers as well. I get it. They need an outsider to bring a little bit of energy to the room. And again, that is a big part of our job. But what they need to be thinking about, rather, it's not, nobody needs an air conditioner. What they need is a good night's sleep because they were at the right temperature, right? That's what they need. They buy an air conditioner. They don't want a bit of plastic stuck in their house making a noise. What they want is the end result of that. And when you're booking a speaker, the question shouldn't be, the first question I ask every person when I'm doing a speaker brief is I say to them, 3 months after my talk, if I have not achieved X, I have failed. What is X? So, and it's not 5 minutes after the talk, because 5 minutes after the talk, hey, if everybody had a good time and the energy's high, amazing. But I'm saying that's fine. That's 50% of my job, and I get that. I'm saying the other 50%. And the funny thing is, when a client pays for a speaker, what they're really paying for, the ROI comes from the other 50%. Because when I have a negotiation with a client around price, they say, oh, our speaking budget is this. I say, well, hold on a second. Let's think about this in a different way. If I manage to achieve X with just 10% of your audience and I get them to do something like this in this way, what would the impact of that be? And they'll tell me. And I say, and if I fail to do that, and I actually don't manage to move the needle at all, what would that be? You know, if I get it wrong, and they'll talk about that. And I say, so how much money are we talking here? How much potential money are we talking here? And they'll say, well, in that example, I don't know, maybe, 10 million, might be dollars, might be that, whatever. And I say, great. I want to understand. So we're having a conversation about, I don't know, whatever, let's pretend the number is 100,000 Rand. And 100,000 Rand, you're saying to me that 100,000 Rand too expensive, you'd rather pay 80,000 Rand. So you're asking me to help solve. You believe that if I get it right, just 10% of your people, but it's worth 1 million Rand or 1 million, and we're having a discussion around a 20%. I think the fact that you're asking me this means that we're asking the wrong question. Then all you want is an entertainer. Then what you should do is go get a comedian, right? Because if you want entertainment, you're going to get more value for money from a comedian, more laughs a minute. But if you want to move the needle of your business, then what you've got to do is you're basically saying to me that you do not trust that I can move the needle of your business effectively, whereas I believe that I can. And because if you believe that, there's not a single second that you would negotiate with me around a 20,000 Rand difference in fee. So what are we doing here? And then we discuss it. And so now we've changed the expectation of what the customer wants.
What is it that we like when we sit in an audience and watch a speaker? You and I were at a function together, and we were critical of one of the speakers on the stage. I'm sure you can remember it. And we had a long conversation afterwards, and we just connected and said, why did that speaker not work? And we both instinctively knew that's because it was almost a monotonous message delivery package. There was no light and shade. There was no actual, I didn't feel that I'd been touched in the audience, and you felt exactly the same. So what is the job of somebody on a stage trying to get a message, trying to get the company's message across to its staff, but in a way that the boss isn't getting it across? He's not touching them in the right ways. What is the, I mean, we understand it instinctively, but you can express and articulate it so well.
First of all, I think the one thing, the gift you gave me today, and I actually just wrote it down because I don't want to forget it, is this idea of light and shade. I love that as a visual metaphor. I think that's amazing. And maybe we can talk about metaphors a bit later and why they're so important. So, and when I started speaking very, very early on, I was speaking with a guy called Simon Woodruff. He was the guy who started Yo Sushi. Before that, he was one of the big, him and his brother Patrick. I actually toured with Patrick with the Rolling Stones and Phil Collins. He was the lighting designer, and Patrick, Simon was to set design what Patrick was to lighting design. And anyway, years later, he started Yo Sushi. We were on a speaking tour together. And after a stage, we got in. This was still when I had my limousine. We climbed into the limo and we drove back. I took him to his hotel, and he said, "Listen, can I give you a bit of unsolicited advice?" And I said, sure. And I was a bit taken aback because I thought I killed it. He said, your energy is incredible, and you have exactly what it takes to be an amazing speaker. You really do. But you take the audience to a bright light from the start of the presentation, and you never let them go. And you just go at this pace the whole time, and there's no room to breathe. And eventually the audience normalizes and adjusts to where you are, so that there's no gap, no break. They're exhausted from adjusting, and they actually lose the value. He said, you need to use your term, you need to take them to the shade. You need to take them light to shade, light to dark, light to dark. You've got to take them light, shade, dark, all the way through these things. And years later, the term we use in Missing Link is emotional amplitude. So you have to get your audience that amplitude curve. I used to say altitude, but the reason I stopped that is ground level. Zero isn't ground level. Like, you want the up and you want the down. And where you start should never be the highest point. If you can get your audience from a 0 to a 5, to a -5, to a 6, to a -6, to a 9, oh, they're going to be hanging. They're not going to know what hit them. It's like a great film. And so that's the first part of it. The second part, and this week we can go back to the classics like Aristotle, his personal hero. And he speaks about in rhetoric about the idea of logos, pathos, and ethos. So when your audience, when you want to, now, these are the tools of persuasion. And you might say, oh, I'm doing a speech. I'm not trying to persuade. That's the only reason to get on stage, is you're trying to persuade people of something, right? Even though I'm trying to persuade that motivational speaker is just an emotional connection that lacks action. Even the good motivational speakers will try and actually get you to do something. So 3 things: logos, pathos, and ethos. A lot of bad motivational speakers just exist in pathos. That just let's go. Logos is head, pathos is heart, and ethos is gut. They might trade on pathos and ethos, a motivational speaker. So, oh, I really connected with that person. I really, really felt it. And I trust them as well. They're very genuine. But you finish and you don't know what to do because there's no logos. So you're just sitting there like, oh, okay. Then you get the speaker we were talking about who had logos, logic, and ethos. I trusted them. So it was no lack of trust. And their information was really good, but it never connected with me ever. Right? So I was like, So the one was inspiring, and the other that was interesting, but I didn't know what to do with it. I was just like, oh, okay. And it never really landed for me because I never felt connected to the speech. And then the third group is pretty obvious, but that would be, I might the person might be really saying things about a topic that seem researched. It's content. I care about the topic, but I don't trust the person. And this is all of politics. So if Biden says this about, climate, and I care about the topic and I can see its information, but I don't trust the source, it's gone. So a good speaker needs to make sure that this Venn diagram of logos, pathos, and ethos, head, heart, and gut, come together in every single interaction they do. And that's what I believe that the speaker we were referring to failed to get right.
And we both knew it instinctively. And I guess any audience member would if they'd analyzed it. But we were there to enjoy the presentation, and it didn't.
We were there as audience.
We were.
None of us had a connection. That was what was nice, right? We were simply there to enjoy.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting distracted, and yeah.
I love being in. I've been in audiences for 30 years, and I love sitting far enough back that I can see the reaction and how the presenter has touched the audience. When somebody looks at their neighbor or takes a tissue out or nods, then they're being touched, they're being reached. And for me, that's why I still go to so many of the events that we're involved with, because how do you know if somebody's still doing it right? And it's funny because so many speakers say, gee whiz, we've never had an agent come watch us speak. Well, I just don't know how you can know how good they are, because I've never yet, here comes my swear word, I've never met a speaker who said I'm shit. I've never met a speaker who says they're bad. They're all, probably as good as anyone in the world.
Yeah, I think you're right. The proof is in the pudding, and stages book stages. So that's what happens, right? Every gig you do is the audition for the next gig. There was something you mentioned there that I love, and my wife and I are going to see a comedian in the weekend. I wish I could remember her name now, but I watched a small clip with her this morning before I left. And there was a scene where she was talking about snoring, and she said something about snoring, and it cut to the audience. And of course, half the audience turned around and looked at the person next to them. And you realize what that speaker did. Now, this is functional comedic empathy, is that she told you about a story about her life that immediately every woman in the audience turned around and looked at their snoring husbands, or vice versa. And they knew they were there. And that moment of where they laughed together was what comedy is. That was such a beautiful thing. And that talks about just this person's trying to transport you to a position. And that's all of comedy, right? To be where you have been, but to see something funny that you haven't seen. And I loved it when you just said that, because it's one of my favorite reactions when I say something. But I even love it when I say something that's almost a little bit funny and shocking. And then they look at each other, but it's surprise and delight. It's not surprise. It's not that's the wrong one. If you time it well and you get like that, everyone needs to be a speaker just to experience. I wish there was a camera you could do, like speaker cam, where I could show you, if you're not a speaker, if I could transport you to what it looks like for me, so that you could see what I see, those little reactions, those little things, people nodding at me, people engaging with me. It is every reaction from an audience feels like a little gift, and every one of those reactions is fuel, right? They just throw at you just to keep you going. And the more thrill they, because the more they acknowledge a certain style, a certain joke, a certain thing. I've been in rooms where some audience like, okay, this audience, they want emotion, they want to go deep, and that's where I've taken them. And I've been in rooms where like, okay, these guys want to laugh, that's where they want to go, and that's where I've taken them.
And I
And they're all wonderful.
I think we've also got to be sensitive about our audiences. I remember briefing a performer who basically spoke and sang, very talented. And I said, okay, it's an audience, probably average age 60, because partners had come along to the evening after the day of the conference. And I said, so you got men and women, partners, and you've got to just remember that. And he dropped an F-bomb. Well, I was, once again, in that audience. It was the most uncomfortable bristling of, the guys after a game of golf or in the pub with their mates. That's one thing. We all know the rude words, but I think there are times when you simply do not use them. And I don't know if it's because I'm an old gray hair, except you're a young gray hair. Look at you. And
I'm 49. I'm not that young.
and I just think there is a respect that you should never forget about.
So I think there are two different things. I think you can swear with somebody as a sign of respect. Okay, so if you get onto stage, right? So you've got to earn it. So 20-year-old me, or 20, I started speaking when my son was born 21 years ago. So what does that make me? 27, 28 years old. 28-year-old me, I was king of the hill. I thought I knew better. I was all the bad things. Like I'm so accumulated. I want to say I'm embarrassed, but I'm more just interested that, okay, that was the journey, right? I probably had to go through that. We all have to go through our asshole phase. I apologize to everyone I was hard to work with. I was young. Okay, so what happened though is I'd get on stage and I would jump straight in and I would shock them from the way I got on stage. I don't do that anymore, but I still want the audience to feel comfortable. And what I realized is 90% of audiences, in fact, if anything, older audiences are more likely to say inappropriate things, right, than younger audiences. If I'm go out with my dad and my son is 21 and my dad is 76, I'm about 78. I'm a lot more worried that my dad says something inappropriate than my son, because my dad's generation said inappropriate jokes and cheeky things and stuff like this. And they came from the 70s and things. So, but what I do now is I'm very aware. So I try to get them to the point where they feel like we're connected. And then I might throw in late in their sets or something, a sneaky, and this is what I was talking about earlier, a well-timed fuck. And it's one little thing that when I do it, it feels completely ungratuitous. It feels like that was the right word at that time. And that then the audience loves it, because it kind of breaks, sometimes it'll break the tension of maybe a low moment I've taken them to or something like this. And that, when I do that, and I'll gauge the audience. If I don't think they're right, I won't bother with it. Right. But if I think that I've got them to that point and it's an evening function and they're trying to, which I hate, and they're trying to get something a bit light, then I'll take them there.
Yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, when they've had a couple of beers, it's not the time to try and get a message across that matters. Oh. We're going to have to start wrapping up just because it's time, but we'll do this again, in the future. What's change in leadership? How do leaders have to think with AI, with new trends, with social media having the power that it has? Can a 60-year-old still be the CEO of a successful company? It's the biggest, most challenging question I've asked you today. But how do they start their thinking to get them on the right road to achieving what needs? It's a radically changed world.
So I'm obsessed with this concept at the moment. This is basically all I think about. I'm writing a book now called Relentless Relevance. My keynote is called Relentless Relevance. Everything is around the idea that we need to be relentlessly relevant. And a lot of people touch on the word, I love that topic, relevance. And they forget the word relentless. And I think that the interesting thing, the adjective is more important than the noun. We always valued the noun. We always valued being relevant, but it's what has changed is the pace of relevance. So when I started in Missing Link, a big part of our work was doing change management. So we existed through a long period of stability, and now there's going to be a big change, and we needed to manage that change. Now I think we need to, if anything needs to be managed, it's the status quo. We exist in a period of liminality, that any organization that isn't in a state of evolution as opposed to revolution, that isn't constantly trying to stay relentlessly relevant, and relevance being the state of being appropriate to the matter at hand. What is the matter at hand, and how appropriate, how relevant are we appropriate to this matter of hand at the moment? First of all, I don't think there's any age of leader that can choose that is not right or wrong for that. I do think it's slightly harder with a leader who's trying to leave a legacy, because they are trying to preserve something. I often feel that those leaders are best at a certain level. They best serve the organization on the organization's board, right? Their job is to help counsel and hold the CEO accountable. I'm not saying this universally true, though. I think you can have leaders of age. But what we want to do is just to make sure that as leadership, that one of the big ideas I go to war with, specifically in my talk for leaders, is this idea of strategy as a construct and as a technology. Strategy seemed like it's just, of course, we'd have a strategy, but hold on a second. Strategy was a technology created for a very different time, a time in which 10 years from now is going to look a lot like now. And that's not the case anymore. What we need is a strategic destination. So we need to operate in a state of liminality, in this state of flux and change. And to me, and let me let this sit for a second, the only requirement for leadership is change. Okay, nobody needs a leader.
Ability to change.
Well, no, I'm saying that you never need a leader unless you are in a state of change, right?
Okay.
Because the rest of the time you might need a manager. So if we're in a restaurant and we're doing everything great, and we just got to manage how many meals come out, how many tables can be sat at a certain time, do we have the right amount of stock? Everything, we know the restaurant's running, we're not changing anything, the menu isn't changing. Now all we need is a management. That's not leadership. Everybody knows their job, everyone just needs to be managed. Leadership is required when there's something to change, there is an unknown future, and we need to head towards it, right? And that's when I need somebody to look to say, oh, I'm about to walk into something uncomfortable, therefore, I need a leader to get me there. So all leadership exists in this state of liminality, in this state of flux and change. There's a lady called Samantha Chris in Canada. She's wonderful, and she speaks a lot about this type of thing. And this, to me, is a very, very important thing for leaders. Therefore, and it's the best time to be a leader, a true leader, because we exist in a state of flux. I believe that we need to, and the core hypothesis of everything I'm working on at the moment is that we need to put relevance as one of our core values in our businesses. And it must be, we must remain relevant. We should be relentless about our relevance. That is every leader's job, to let their staff understand right now that the most important thing we can do is let go of the idea of the status quo. And we should no longer have to apologize for change, but we should apologize if we're not changing enough. And then the leader's job is to separate which trends are trends. And the job is not to move to every single thing that happens, but to figure out how they can just constantly move and get out the noise. And so not at the edges, but in that middle space. And I think that's the role of leadership at the moment.
Well, that is certainly provocative and thought-provoking. And it also, it just makes so much sense. So, Rich, thank you for your time, which overran, but, what's time? Let's do this again soon.
That'd be wonderful. And if nothing else, let's just catch up soon.
Great. Thanks, Rich.
Cool.